Why do the best coaches and instructors often find it so difficult to explain exactly what makes them effective? And why do some people keep getting better while others plateau?
You can live the same year over and over again and get very experienced, or you can use different years of experience to experiment and challenge yourself.
Welcome to the Optimizing Human Performance podcast. My guest today is Dr. Jamie Taylor, a coach developer and researcher working at the intersection of learning, performance, and skill acquisition.
One of the only things that we can really hold tight to is the value of an error for learning. There is a mountain of evidence that the harder the practice conditions are, the more likely that learning and transfer is to happen.
If you're leading a team, if you're coaching others, you're building expertise in your own profession, or you're simply trying to avoid repeating the same things over and over again, this conversation will give you practical ways to think differently about learning and performance.
I genuinely don't think there is a better feeling than seeing somebody be able to improve their performance off the back of something that you have given them. We have the capacity to change lives as a result of what we do.
Jamie, welcome to the Optimizing Human Performance podcast. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
It's absolutely my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. Our paths crossed through some work that you were doing in an organization that I was working with. So I've got a good idea of who you are, but our listeners probably don't really know much about you. So straight across to you, can you tell us who you are, what you do professionally, and what brought you to where you are today?
Well, my main role is as the co-lead of the COEX lab at Dublin City University, where we investigate expertise and performance across lots of different domains. Alongside that, at DCU at the university, we've got a professional doctorate program and master's program where predominantly people from high performance sports who are looking to investigate their working practice come and join the master's program, come and join the prof doc. And then alongside that, I do some consultancy work in different sports, different spots. And I've got the great privilege to work with some really interesting people. At the moment, that's doing some work with UK Sports, with Leicester Tigers and Irish Rugby.
That's awesome. How did you get into that? Now, my background, I went degree. I just went straight through academia and ended up landing in a university. Did you do the same, or what was your route into the role that you've got?
No, I had a slightly different path, really. And I often get asked this, and I'm really grateful for it because I suppose I took more of a winding route to where I am. But essentially, my background is first as a teacher, then as a coach. I spent a good block of my career at Leicester Tigers as a rugby coach whilst I was doing my PhD and moved out of there to a role at UK Sport, where I was responsible for supporting coaching practice and curriculum development across lots of different sports. And then leaving there, moved into DCU and have moved into various different consulting roles, different coaching roles since. And I've just had a great pleasure of working with lots of very interesting people in lots of very interesting places. Predominantly, if I was going to try and put a bubble around the work I do, it tends towards focus on coaching, but really if I see coaching as helping people get better at stuff, I see my role as pedagogical, or if we want to use a less fancy term, is just helping people get better at doing some really interesting things.
That's great. That sounds much more interesting than just doing degrees like I did. I wish I'd taken a winding road, as you call it. That sounds much better. You mentioned the word expertise, and I want to get into expertise into a bit of detail. Now, experience is a different word that sometimes gets used interchangeably. I think there's this assumption that because you've done something for a long time, you are experienced, but does that also mean you're an expert? So first question, big one to start us off with, but what's the difference between experience and expertise in your opinion?
Well, I get asked this a lot, and I always start by telling a story. And there was I can think of a chap that I worked with in my first teaching job, and this guy had been in the same role for 45 years. He had never ever worked anywhere else, and if you took him out of the pattern of just delivering the same lessons in the same order, he was completely flummoxed. So even to the point where some of his lesson plans were created 20 years ago. Now, he had an enormous amount of experience but he'd lived the same year over and over and over again. And it's a famous quote that you can live the same year over and over again and get very experienced, or you can use different years of experience to experiment and challenge yourself. And the difference between experience is, well, I've been through this. Expertise is more about how do I use that experience to help myself get better. And the definition of expertise that I like is called the adaptive skill definition of expertise. That is, being able to flexibly pursue your intentions under changing context, or when the context changes so much, you change your intentions. And I think that is a really nice, neat encapsulation of what it means, depending on what domain you're in. It means that you're going to chase something, and once you've got an idea of what you're chasing, things are always going to get in the way. You're always going to have to change. And it doesn't matter whether you're a teacher, it doesn't matter whether you're a coach, or whether you're an instructor, you're going to have to adapt to the situation you're in, the people that are around you.
That's a nice definition. I like that. I'm wondering about some people I've got in my head who might be your experienced guy. They've done the same thing over and over again. They've built up lots and lots of experience. How do you challenge those people to maybe say, look, there's a different way? If you do veer towards this adaptability to become more of an expert rather than just an experienced practitioner, how do you manage that? Do you get any pushback from the experienced people? Like you said, I've been here 30 years. Who are you to tell me to do it differently? How do you navigate those issues?
Well, look, I think that very often is a wholly valid perspective to have, because for me, often as an outsider, and there's lots of places that I go that I'm not an outsider, but for me as an outsider, if I was going to stroll in somewhere and say, well, actually, you've done like this your whole career, but because of the books I've read, I can tell you a different way to do it. I think that would be really undermining and also pretty stupid from my perspective, because things are as they are for a reason. And I think it'd be beholden on somebody coming in from the outside to appreciate, well, why are things as they are, and work from that basis. And I often say, look, I see myself as having almost three different modes of work. So when I'm supporting somebody, so the first mode might be I'm helping them to become competent, that we're trying to help them reach a minimum standard of practice. And that very often doesn't apply to the sorts of people that you're referring to there, who have been around the block and are often incredibly competent. Then I have another mode, which I consider to be expertise based, which is I'm hopefully helping somebody to become more adaptable in order to flexibly pursue different intentions, and to do that maximize it as the intelligence through which they pursue that. That's, I think, is a really different way of operating. And depending on who you're talking about, people need different things. So I don't think there is a single recipe, but I think it's really, really important to understand the context that you're working in. And then if you're working with somebody, you say, well, actually, I think there's a slightly different way here. The way in might be to say, look, out loud, I don't know this. I know that you know this. But if I was going to draw on my experience, draw on the understanding that I have, I think if you try it like this, you would get this response. And if you want to, we can walk that through.
And did that work? Is that have you had positive experiences of that?
I absolutely have had positive experiences of that, but it's I used the fancy word pedagogy earlier, and I see pedagogy as more than just what do I do, but it's in any we'll call it a teaching and learning relationship. I don't mean teacher in the way that most people would see it, but if I'm offering something, it's how that's taken, and then how people respond to it, and then how it ends up really going back and forward a lot. Now, that means that I need to bring something to the table, but the other person also does need to bring something to the table. And I would say that normally the way that, particularly if I was looking at lots of organizations that we might have been involved in, that the people would see a carrot and stick approach where, well, you have to go and do this. You've got to go and take this package because this is coming up. Instead of going, well, what do you actually need in order to progress your career? What is going to be most useful for you to be a really high quality operator? And if somebody knows why they're doing it, if somebody therefore sees value in it, then I think you're far more likely to have a good result. Whereas if it's imposed on somebody, They don't know why they're doing what they're doing, and suddenly this bloke from outside comes in and goes, well, now's your time to go and do this, and because I've read this, I think I think you're going up a dead end there.
I absolutely agree with that, and I have seen experiences of the practitioner waiving his credentials, if you will. Let's say it's this eminence-based practice because I'm eminent. I've got this qualification. I've read this book. Therefore, you should listen to me. It doesn't. You're all right. It doesn't go down well. It does not go down well in certain contexts. I think it's fair to say. I'm interested in a problem that I've seen. It's something that I've seen personally. It's something I've heard on other podcasts. There's a guy called Preston Klein. He's been on the podcast. He's in the first series, and he talks about something called a tacit knowledge transfer problem. And I've seen it. So how this plays out, at least in my experience, you get the guy or the girl who's doing the job. Their knowledge is in the doing. You know, their knowledge is in the actions. They know teamwork because they work in teams. They do it. And then you ask them to leave that environment and you ask them to now instruct teamwork, just as an example, just as an arbitrary skill. They've lived it, they've done it, they know what good teamwork is in the performing of team-based practice, but they don't necessarily know how to verbalize what good teamwork is. You know, it's I don't know how, it's a tacit knowledge problem. It's how do you train people to articulate, to understand, kind of coming back to what you just said then about, some of the experience versus expertise. How do we draw this stuff out so that we can actually help people instruct better? So they've got more self-awareness of the things that they've got, the things they do, so they understand. A bit of a rambling question, but I think you get the gist. How do we get over this tacit knowledge transfer problem in your experience?
Without getting too geeky with my answer here, so
you get as geeky as you want. I don't mind.
For the last few years, I've been playing around with a series of tools called cognitive task analysis tools. And if we take the fundamental principle that if we're going to help somebody else learn, that we need to be able to make explicit what is tacit. So I can do this, but I don't know how to talk about it. And I don't know how to give you information about what I do. If we take that as a really quite important principle, that if we're going to transfer information to somebody else, well, I might know how to do it implicitly or tacitly. That's where I think that tools like cognitive task analysis can become really useful. And what all this is a series of different interviewing-based techniques that could involve straightforward interviews about difficult episodes of practice. They could involve more generic interviews. They could also involve things like concept mapping, where you help people, you sit down with somebody and ask them questions that are deliberately designed to get into the more difficult elements of their work. And I see this as just so completely fundamental. If I look at my own world, if I look at coaching, so often the support that coaches get is so far away from the role that they actually do, because there's lots of these abstract concepts that are created that are supposed to be able to support coaches to do their job. So few of them have. That's not fair. Not that many of them have real direct relevance to the work of a coach as it's actually done. And as a result, because coaches have been left out of this thing, they then interact with material that is that's been generated abstractly, and they go, well, there's no relevance to that. And then the people who generate this abstract stuff look over the fence and go, well, you lot can't tell us what's going on, so we need to tell you. Yeah. So we end up with this gap down the middle. I'd be saying that there are a series of tools that you can use that can help make the tacit explicit. And then once people have made the tacit explicit, and this might be this one is controversial, it's an opinion of mine. I think that once you have
I don't mind controversy.
Well, don't hold me to this. Once you've made the tacit explicit, it's easier to reflect on it, and it's easier to reflect on what you're doing. But obviously, you can take that too far, and you can end up down a road where you're reflecting on absolutely every tiny little thing. Yeah. But if you're going to train somebody in teamwork, you might be a really good team worker, but you've got no idea how to talk about it. And that's where I think cognitive task analysis can really help.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of, you just mentioned then one of the coaching practices that are maybe a bit abstract, maybe a bit arbitrary, that don't reflect the reality of coaching. Can you give me an example? What do you mean by that? Is there anything that comes to mind that is in the textbooks that just doesn't apply in the real world?
I'm conscious of causing too much controversy here, but I'll soften it a bit by saying I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine about more implicit learning the other day, and I was having a conversation with them about minimizing error during practice, and that if you want to, there are lots of different studies that have shown over the course of time that implicit learning has maintained a more robust response under pressure. That is, if I learn to do something without making it explicit, that I'm more likely at the end of it to not mess it up under pressure. However, when you apply that principle to the real world, when real world activities are really complex, that you don't get loads of opportunities to try it over and over again, well, implicit learning here starts becoming so difficult to actually deliver on that I'm not sure why we're investigating it as we are in the first place. So what we need to be able to do is offer people who are instructors and coaches more nuanced information to go, well, when might that be useful? How might that be useful? And if you are going to do this, this is what it might look like. And I don't think any research, I just don't think that kind of research is going on. And therefore, it's left to people to just try and pick up very lab-based studies that are very safe studies and be able to interpret them in their own world.
Coming back to error-based learning, like removing errors. I'll tell you a quick story. I won't give you the details, but I was watching a student learn a very complex, very dangerous skill. And there was a certain set of procedures that they had to do, and he got it wrong. And the error could have been really quite dangerous. Like the consequences of that error could have been huge. Luckily, it wasn't. It was fine. But it could have been significant risk to life error, base damage. And I turned to one of the instructors because he'd seen this problem, he'd seen the error, and he kind of had a wry smile and said, "He'll never do that again." And I thought, he won't, will he? He won't, because he's like, that error right there. You don't want to remove that error. I mean, in some ways you do, because you don't want the catastrophic failure. But that student will never, ever make that mistake ever again in the rest of his life when he's doing these skills, when he's doing these activities. So I thought there's a value there. There is a value in making errors. And I've seen it numerous times that error-based learning in certain things is so effective at actually taking some concepts where they've tried rote learning, they've tried like problem-based learning, and actually once they actually make mistakes under pressure, but they're given a chance to then redo the thing, it is the error that makes these really complex real-world problems stick the most. And I mean, I'm no expert in skill acquisition, it's just an observation that I've made. There is value in it. I don't understand why people would want to remove errors. Is that something you see a lot of?
I absolutely see a lot of it. And I think that there's some very interesting people looking at the body of skill acquisition research and literature that's out there. And I think my perspective and my read on that is that one of the only things that we can really hold tight to is the value of an error for learning. Now, the misrepresentation of that is, we'll make learning really chaotic and really exploratory, and we'll just try stuff and it fails. And again, that's where we end up down the far side of, well, that is not practical, nor do I necessarily think it is really impactful for learning. There is a mountain of evidence that the harder that the practice conditions are, the more likely that learning and transfer is to happen. However, we don't want to go down it's chaotic, nor do we want to get down the road that most people's view of learning is often, well, when I was at school, this is how I learned. when I was an athlete, this is how I learned, or this is how I was instructed to do something. So it's no mistakes, do it again and again and again and again and again and again. And if I get better in half an hour, well, I've learned it now. Move on. We can tick this box. That job is done. And we ignore all the really good evidence about, there's an idea called desirable difficulty. Desirable difficulty is about the spacing of learning and the spacing of practice over time. And that the more space that you have between practice episodes, the more likely you are to be able to learn and transfer. There's another idea called challenge point theory, which is about how difficult practice is relative to how good I am. And I think if you start pulling these ideas together, my personal perspective is that if you're an instructor, you're a coach, the thing that you probably want to be paying the most attention to is how difficult is somebody finding the activity. And one of the ways that I work with sport coaches is by saying, well, you've got to almost identify ahead of time and go, I want the athletes to experience this. I want them to engage in highly exploratory learning when I'm getting my success rate is really low, or this is really dangerous, really pressurized. Actually, I want them to do a really good job under the conditions I've set. This is we're in live fire training. Well, it's not the time now to be making mistakes, everyone. And I think if we can figure that out and start building what we see, setting our intentions around that, I think we'll probably be in a better place as instructors and coaches.
I'm going to offer you a challenge. How do you do this? If I'm an instructor and I've got 20 people, they're all going to have different perceptions of difficulty, aren't they? Because their level of competence is going to be different. Their experiences are different. You know, if we take an arbitrary skill, someone may have been doing it every day for the past 6 months. It might be brand new to somebody else. How do we actually play this out in reality when the level of difficulty is going to be so subjective? Is the art of coaching me being able to individualize, or can you do it en masse? Can I set a practice for 30 people and they all will get something different from it? I'm not sure if I'm describing this very well, but do you see what I mean? Do you have to personalize that? Can you one coach still coach 30 people?
This is an enormously practical question. In some places, in some of the places that I would work, you can absolutely personalize it ahead of time because the coach has got an enormous body of experience of working with each of the athletes. There will be a team of coaches whose sole job it is to make sure that challenge point might vary across a training group. I suspect that that's not the case with what you're thinking of. And one of the ways that I would say, one of the ways I talk about this is you have to decide who is this aimed at. Now, you might decide as an instructor, well, on average, this is what comes to my door. This is the level of capability that normally walks in. And therefore, I'm going to pitch it at that level. And if somebody goes way beyond that, well, I might go over to them and say, here's a way to make this a bit harder. Same as, well, actually, this person here is really struggling with this. They need a bit more help. Now, whether we decide that's the art of teaching or I'd see that as the practice of pedagogy. It's being able to go, I'm clear on where I'm setting the challenge. And then if it works for the majority, great. Then I've got to attend to the outliers and make sure that some people are getting a bit more and some people are getting a bit less.
So is that a question of having an agreed standard that we have to, if you're going to learn a skill, that in order to be proficient, you have to hit that standard. If you exceed it, fine, but that is the absolute minimal level. And equally, sort of adding on to that, is that cognitive task analysis? Do they allow you to understand that, to draw out, well, what is the minimum level that we need of a cognitive skill or a physical skill? Is that how it plays out in your experience?
Well, I'd always, and my interest is in high performance, so I'd always be cautious, particularly in, let's say if I'm an instructor, if everything is minimum standard based and it's risk based, that we can say this person's passed this, they can move on. I would really worry about when are we developing the really high performance skills that we need if we're going to be the best operators that we can be.
Yeah.
Which I think
that standard could be
yeah,
high, though, right? It could be a very
yes,
high standard, but it's
yeah,
just the minimum standard that you know you have to reach that in order to do the job.
yes. And then back of your head, well, how do we make sure that people who are the very best still are getting better at this? When it comes to cognitive task analysis, one of the weaknesses of the approach is that you need people who are good. It doesn't work particularly well if you've got somebody that isn't that good. So when it comes to identifying the minimum level, one of the pretty common questions, and it's phrased in different ways, is, well, what errors would a beginner make here? And from that, you can start contrasting expert performance to novice performance. But the question of good enough gets a little bit difficult, because if you're asking very, very good people what good enough is, often their perceptions of good enough will be higher than where the bar might need to be.
Yeah. It reminds me of, you've probably come across the mental toughness literature back in, the early 2000s. I remember there's the famous paper, the What is Mental Toughness, and it lists the attributes of somebody who's mentally tough. And then a number of years later, a rival research group developed a slightly different version, and they changed it from something like, one of the attributes is someone who's mentally tough can deal with competition, knowledge anxiety, whatever it was. I can't remember the exact words. A few years later, they created this straw man of the mentally tough athlete that was just unreachable. It was like, can always do this, and every performance can achieve that standard every time. Like there's just perfection. And I remember at the time reading those papers thinking, you've created a Superman that in describing the attributes of someone who's mentally tough, you've actually describing someone who doesn't exist, because you've taken, it's like creating, the barroom philosophy. In reality doesn't reflect anybody. You're just creating these people that don't exist. Does that ever happen with a cognitive task analysis? When you get these experts who are really good, they end up describing something that's actually unachievable in terms of a set of cognitive skills or physical skills.
Well, I think if it ended up getting used as we've developed this super person, and now everybody needs to meet that mold, I think that would just be a poor use of the cognitive task analysis. Whereas if one of the ways in which cognitive task analysis gets represented is you talk about different demands. Here is a demand of a role. Here is a demand of a task. And if we understand what is difficult about a task, we can then figure out what's the information we need to pay attention to, and what are the mental and physical strategies that we deploy to make best use of that information. And it means that there's loads of different ways you can tackle the demand, but there's no rote thing that says, well, I need to do A to B to C to D. It's just, here is the demand. Here's the information that is probably most useful to you whilst you're doing it. And here are the ways in which people are very good at this, have done this in the past. I think then that gives you a good bit of flexibility with how you might go about instructing, or how you might go about producing really high quality teamwork, given that the normal answer is, well, what's good teamwork? Well, it depends on the team, depends on the individual, depends on the leader, depends. Mm. And as a result, it's really difficult to represent difficult, cognitively challenging work, which is nearly everything that's anything that's interesting in a knowledge and skills type approach to articulating what good is.
Yeah. Can we maybe change tack a little bit? I want to talk about pressure. I want to talk about stress and pressure. One of the things that I've seen time and time again is that you can execute a skill, put someone under pressure, it changes. They don't execute the skill in the same way. This idea that we fall back to our level of habits, or there's lots of different phrases or Instagram memes around these sorts of things. I've also seen it with instructors, with coaches, that you can give them a lot of information. They are very knowledgeable often. They'll be able to converse about how to do things, and then you put them under pressure in a coaching situation and they change. That happens as well. Is there anything in that? Is that something you've studied how coaching changes when the coach is under pressure or the instructor is now under pressure to deliver. How does pressure or stress, or whatever phrase you want to call it, whatever, however you call it, how does it change coaching?
So it's not, I haven't studied this, but I've absolutely observed it. If I look at often, if we consider just how difficult it is to change something, full stop, where we can give people relatively easy conditions and we can go, right, so you've changed this movement, you've changed this approach to practice as an instructor, you've changed something. But what we've done to get that very often is pull them out of the high fidelity, realistic situation that they actually need to do it in and put them somewhere else. Now, that put them somewhere else can be really useful, definitely in the early stages of learning. It can be really useful for practicing something when you need to do a lot of it or if it's unsafe. But ultimately, if we're going to support transfer, transfer being, I can do this here, but can I do it under high pressure? We need to offer people learning conditions that provide the same pressure, provide the same fidelity or realism of practice. And for lots of reasons, if that's instructing, if it's coaching, it's very difficult to do that unless you're with people and you're with people a lot. Or alternatively, if the instructor as a learner or the coach as a learner is very good at generating feedback for themselves and is a very good reflector as well.
If they're not good at, if they can't generate feedback from themselves, or feedback is generally missing. So there's some environments where the coach intentionally withholds feedback to see how someone deals with that absence of feedback. Does that influence any of, like, does that influence the performance in certain people? Like, how does that work for you if there's an absence of feedback? Do some people still perform really well, or some people coach really well if they've not got the feedback coming in? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So there's an old idea that was built that came up in a Gary Klein and Daniel Kahneman paper where they talked about the validity of an environment, where a highly valid environment provides lots of feedback very quickly, and it's very easy to become an expert in a field where you get lots of good feedback. I say that tentatively. For example, it's not very easy to become an expert in chess, but it's a lot easier to get very high quality feedback in chess than it is, say, another domain. One of the keys that they suggest, and I agree, is that the tighter and quicker the tighter the feedback loops, that is, I get information from doing something, whether that be externally or internally, the more likely I am to get lots of opportunities to practice to get better. The absence of feedback, I think, creates a really big problem for learning. Delaying feedback is slightly different, where I get the feedback, but there's a bit of time when I've got to wait, think about it, reflect, then I get offered it. But the absence of it completely, I think, is a big problem for learning.
And is that just verbal feedback, or are you talking about the complete absence? Because in chess, as an example, you make the wrong move, there is feedback there because you lose your key, you lose your bishop. So what do we mean when we're talking about feedback? What can you give me examples?
Well, if I'm an instructor and I want to know how good my performance is at instructing a group, unless there is somebody there to help me and to offer feedback on my process, there is nearly no feedback available to me. They talk about the lowest level of feedback in teaching is, I'm teaching you, what do you think of it? And very often the ratings that people get are based on how easy was it, how good looking you are, and there's all sorts of other things that
I used
have
to get
no
horrendous
relevance.
student evaluations.
Hey, well, speak for yourself. And very often the best pedagogues or the best instructors get the worst ratings from people that they're teaching, coaching, instructing, because they'll make it hard. So it's in those situations there is no feedback available because the results of what you do are not immediately obvious, and it might be performance that somebody offers in a year or two's time that is the result of what you do there. That's what I mean by the absence of feedback.
Okay, I get it. So for instructors, so that's a really good point, and I think, again, I've seen some of these things play out, that some of the environments, some of the cultures of the coaching cultures, the instruction cultures, I guess it's like you're placed in this environment, you're given the trust. We're putting you in this role as the coach, as the instructor, because you're good, you're special. And sometimes the individual, my observation is not universally true of everybody, but some people almost don't want to get feedback because it might sort of dent their ego. It's like, I think I'm really good at this and I don't want to be told otherwise. Like, just let me think I'm good at this and I'll keep doing this job. So almost they just don't want to hear it, which I understand. I get that. I get it. Yeah, the student evaluation one's an interesting thing, because I think as a teacher I used to see that the people that got the highest evaluations were the ones who set the easiest assessments and the best looking, obviously.
And look, that's the problem we started with, is that it's very easy to go and get very experienced doing the same thing, and you make no change whatsoever, but progressively you get more and more confident that what you're doing is the right thing because you've never had any feedback and you haven't thought about it or want to improve your practice. Now, in some cases, that serves people really well. Without putting too fine a point on it, there is no problem for lots of people who don't want to improve their performance, that they're happy with being okay. However, if you really want to improve, it's likely that you need feedback. It's likely that you need to generate feedback loops, whether they're self-generated or whether they're other generated from other people.
Yeah. When I remember I attempted to publish a study years ago. It never got published. It's just sat in a file drawer somewhere. But it was to do with reflection. It was to do with reflective practice. And I remember I sent it off to the journal. And one of the editors came back, and he basically accused. It was classic reviewer 2 comment, very, very critical. But he was basically saying that it was just, this reflection was just narcissistic bootstrapping. Like, these people, all they did was they picked the best thing they did and they just told themselves how great they were. And there was no value in that. And he used this reviewer used the term, refraction is actually probably a better rather than reflection. And the reason he said that is that if you think about, you're looking at a straw in a pint glass of water, you see the water will refract the light and you'll get a slightly different viewpoint of the straw, whereas reflection flips everything. And you say that's what you need. If you just use reflection, you can just focus on the positives, and it's actually useless. It just becomes very narcissistic, and you learn how great you are at things. You don't necessarily get critical. He recommended in this paper around this concept of the critical friend, that is the person who's offering you the challenging questions. That it's the person who's, as an instructor, you are having to look at your practice in a different way to understand how it changes. I know you've done loads of work in coach education. Is that you? Are you that critical friend? Are you the person who's helping them see their coaching practice in a different way? And secondary to that, if someone doesn't have that critical friend, how do they refract rather than reflect? If that again makes any sense to you.
It makes loads of sense. So that is a really important part of my role as a coach developer. So if I go and work with a coach to help them improve their performance, a good part of that is as critical friend. I mean, there's loads and loads of other methods available to the coach developer, whether it's working one-on-one with somebody, but the traditional mode of practice is, I'm coming to help you critically reflect, or I might be more direct and I might offer more feedback to somebody. I think that your reviewer's idea of refraction is pretty close to different, like counterfactual thinking, and lots of other ideas that have come up in lots of different reflection tools, where people, depending on what you're looking for, might say, right, give me 3 different ways to do that. There's a really nice tool called the Big 5 Questions by Lol Collins and Dave Collins in a paper. They posed a set of questions were, what did you do? Why did you do it? Give me 3 other ways you could have done that. Choose one of those and tell me which set of context would make one of those options more appropriate, and how will you know that the decision that you made was a good one. That for me, and tools like that of setting up counterfactual thinking are a good way to do that refraction. However, I would probably push back on what your reviewer said in that it just depends on the purpose you're looking for. Because feeling confident about one's performance is often a very important thing. And I'd say a good proportion of the coaches that I've worked with, because they are so unbelievably professional and they're driving so often to improve their performance, they can get caught in an absolute web of, I could have done it like this, I could have done it like this, I could have done it like this. And so much of this depends on, well, what are you trying to achieve with your reflection? Because often we might want to dial down the bit that says, well, I'm trying to improve my performance here. Well, actually, I need to be happy that I'm doing a good job and I need to go and get some sleep.
A very important thing, sleep. We've talked about that a lot on the podcast. We had Dave Collins on the podcast in the last series. So anyone listening wants to get more from Dave, that's a good episode to listen to for sure. I guess that point you just made then, when do you get some sleep? When do you stop? Is that a question of, I want to call it burnout. I'm not sure if burnout's the right term, but I've seen this with coaches who burnout you see with high performers, whether an athlete, whether a coach, whether a leader, an instructor, an operator, businessman, whatever. You see burnout all the time, or I do. And sometimes it is the person who's desperate to get better. I mean, burnout was always seen as like the dark side of motivation. I think that was a phrase that was coined in maybe the 80s. Whether it's true or not, people disagree, but it makes sense to me that people who burn out are often super driven. And is this an issue then? Like when you've got that coach who's reflecting all the time, trying to be critical, trying to get better, trying to just dial up every little bit, these 1% philosophies, is that just laying the groundwork for burnout with these coaches? Do you see it? Have you seen it?
I see. I definitely see burnout. I definitely see, particularly in professional sport, the conditions of pressure, job pressure, constant game cycles I see is really prevalent. I also see in Olympic sports, I see people who are traveling and might be away 250 days a year, 300 days a year. Those kinds of conditions, I think, set up people for exactly what we're talking about here. Now, if you add on to that somebody that is very driven and is very poor at finding an off switch, I do definitely see people who burn out. More often, I see people that the other side of this is that they get burned out because they're not improving their capacity for performance and therefore are not performing in their job role. And then you can end up in a bit of a spiral. And I think this is where the essence of, and given that you've had Dave on before, you'd be familiar with the idea of it depends. But this is where
he did
so much of this.
Times. Yeah. You know Dave well.
So much of this is based on the person that you're working with. It's really difficult for somebody to come on and go, well, here's best practice here. We can talk about what might be evidence-informed practice, but so much of it depends on the intentions, going back to the expertise idea. What are you actually trying to achieve here? What are you actually trying to achieve as an instructor with the people that you're instructing? Because unless you've got that, it's very difficult to come back from it and go, well, here's the approach I'm taking.
Yeah. And it sounds obvious. Like, I think we know, like, the broad brush approach. I am the coach. I will do it this way and you will respond to me as a coach. Clearly is not the best way of doing things. Or maybe, again, it depends. Maybe there is a time when that's the best way of doing things. But I think having the ability to think critically and ask that "it depends" question is the basis of expertise. I think in my experience, a differentiator between a novice and an expert is someone who has the capacity to consider the different way. There's an alternative. You can see it in a different way. You can be adaptable and agile in your thinking. I think that it's the difficult thing is doing that when you've got the constraints of, well, it's dangerous. I've not got much time. I've got this person watching me, it can sometimes just be easier to say, well, I will exert control because of those things. As a coach, I will control you because I've got all these other things that you can't see. So I get it. I get why it makes sense. It's easy, but it's not simple. Or it's simple, it's not easy. I never quite know the way around there. But yeah, I like what you're talking about.
And that's what I encourage people to do, things like just micro, call it micro innovations, which is a lot very, very pompous way of saying consistently trying new stuff and experimenting. So I don't know, let's say you've got 4 package deliveries and you're doing it one after the other over a few months. Well, try 1 like this, try 2 like this, try 3 like this. And then in 4, decide, well, this one seems to work best. Probably because of this, let's give it a go. And I think that's the hallmark of what I see from really effective practitioners, is that there's always that little bit of experimentation going on.
I'm wondering that you've just made me think of something there. Is there an ethical question that comes up with that? The reason I asked that, play out this scenario that you're instructing somebody who is trying to progress their career. So they're on some kind of selection assessment course. You're instructing them, and if you deviate from the path and you say, I'm going to change something, but you actually make them worse, you're actively preventing them from passing the course and therefore progressing their career. So where does that play out? I like this micro innovation, but how do you do it when the outcome might actually make somebody less fit? Well, that's the hand grenade question for the day for you, Jamie. There you go.
Well, look, I'm right with you. So if I was thinking about this and I was deliberately just trying something to see what happened, and bugger the consequences, the person who's at the end of it, that's when I think there is a real ethical problem. If, however, it was me trying a different ordering of instruction, or different time on task, or slightly different pressure applied here versus there, well, that's the kind of innovation where there is the reverse ethical question that goes, if I don't experiment and try and improve my practice over the long term, how many people am I failing because I'm not trying to get better?
I wonder what people listening think of that. That'd be an interesting reflection for maybe. I'll talk to some people and see what they think. I agree with you. I do. And I think sometimes the cultures of these instructor cadres can maybe throw out some challenge. But yeah, I do agree with you. Can we just loop back to cognitive task analysis really quickly? I've got a feeling that I've got a few people in mind who's probably listening thinking, oh, that sounds interesting. I'd like to give that a go. I've never done one personally, but I have been around them in one of my previous jobs. We're involved in a cognitive task analysis of sorts. And I know it can be quite resource intensive. Can you just play out, like, if someone who's not a researcher, they're not doing it for a publication, they just want to learn about a role, a job, and they want to do a cognitive task analysis. What does it look like? And is this something that somebody can do to improve their coaching practice, or is it the realm of the academic and you have to get support and bring somebody in? How does it actually work?
I'd say on different levels. If the purpose of this isn't necessarily a research paper, but you want to generate a really high quality model of practice that can be used to help the instruction of others, I would definitely suggest that you get some specialized expertise on it, because that, going back to that ethical question of, if we do a bad job of this, well, what are the consequences of it? Under those circumstances, I do think you need specialists that can come and do a good job. However, if I want to debrief somebody after an episode of practice, all the questions that are on cognitive task analysis are open access. You can type it in and go, well, I'd like to use the critical decision method to understand what somebody was thinking when they were going through this operation. And you can say, well, look, ultimately a CDM is, right, tell me about what you've just done. You build out a timeline. You use that timeline then to decide, what are the decisions that you took? Okay, well, that one seems interesting. That one seems interesting. That one seems interesting. Then you ask them, what are they noticing? What was the information that was important to you here? What were you seeing, hearing? What were your goals? What were you trying to achieve at this point here? And essentially, you build out an understanding of why they've made particular decisions. And it isn't that bit there is not rocket science.
Mm.
That bit there is sitting down and just doing a really thorough debrief. And that might take longer than just doing the normal debrief templates that lots of people will follow. But you'll get a lot more information from it. So if it's, I want to embed this in my practice to get better by asking better questions to those I'm instructing, I would 100% go and advise people, go and search for this online, go and look for critical decision method, applied cognitive task analysis, adaptive skill, critical decision method. There's loads of stuff out there that you can use that will provide some really useful questions for you.
I'll try and get some of those in the show notes. I think I'll get some of those links. I think that'd be really useful. I'd never really thought of it that way, the way you've just described it. That now I'm thinking about it, it makes perfect sense. It forms a debrief template. Like you say, there are so many debriefing templates out there. There's literally hundreds. But that using that critical decision framework could just be another really useful framework for people to use if they've never. Again, people don't get trained in how to debrief. They don't. There's a need for people to learn how to deliver good debriefs and deliver feedback in that sense. So that's a really good point that I think people could use it in that respect.
And often people who go through it really enjoy it because it provides such a really strong reflective episode for them. And as long as you're using it for the purpose of debrief, I really don't think it requires somebody to be really expert in it. I'd also point people towards the Naturalistic Decision Making Association, which is a really good resource for people that are interested in this.
Yeah, Gary Klein, I'm trying to remember the book he wrote. You probably could tell me his famous book, but there's some
Seeing What Others
stuff.
Don't.
Yeah, I think that might be it. Is that the one where he tells the story of the fireman entering? Yeah. I won't ruin it. I won't finish the story. People can read the book. But yeah, Gary Klein, Naturalistic Decision Making is a good one to look at. If you were brought into say a military organization, an emergency service, that kind of thing, and you could redesign the coaching practice. I know you've had some experience. You've come into some of these environments. What are the big rocks? The things that if you could just make the big changes to make a real difference. Have you thought about these things? What could be done differently in your experience to really change how we instruct and how we coach people?
I think this is a really difficult one because I think it depends a lot on the skill that's being taught.
It depends again.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. There are obviously logistical things that matter in the kinds of organizations that we're talking about, because if you're going to deliver realistic practice, it is not as simple as putting out a few cones and rolling a ball in. There's a lot of things that need to move, and sometimes it gets very expensive. I personally think that one of the most important things you can think of is being really, really clear what the target performance is. What is it that we actually want somebody to be able to do at the end of this, and how long we want them to be able to do it for, rather than just saying, right, they've completed this training, they are safe, signed off, and taking more of a performance-based lens and think about how is it that we help somebody go towards really outstanding performance. And this probably is really difficult, but I would be looking at the sequencing of training and how often somebody gets to train in a particular area, and trying to make sure that it's there is more interleaving going on, which is I get the opportunity to do it over and over and over again over months rather than days. I would also look at and get people to consider how they make practice more difficult and more realistic. Now, that could be, particularly with the realism side of things, and given the difficulty of that could be embedding psychological skills like imagery into training packages, which I think would be, the Swiss Army knife of psychology. I think that could be a really, really useful tool. I would also then look at what ways in which we can make practice more or less difficult, and how we can at least try to replicate some of the transfer conditions, making the final deliverable relatively pressurized, and give people the opportunity to do things under relatively pressurized conditions over a period of time.
I love that. I think I could see that making a big difference. I think I could see if you could make all of those changes, and again, the it depends is the big one, because there's a big constraint, which is money and time. That when people are time poor and money poor, it's very difficult to make those changes. So I could understand why someone might push back, but it does make a lot of sense. I guess maybe we can start to wrap up, but a word that comes to mind is judgment. That part of what a good coach does is they make decisions, they make judgments about when to increase complexity, when to make it more difficult, when to interleave, like how much space in between the different practices. It's a lot of judgments. Does that come naturally to some people? Do they just have this sixth sense for coaching? I'm just wondering, are there natural born instructors who just get it? They just know when to make the right judgments in terms of the best type of instruction? Or is that part of coach education that this is something that you have to learn? Like, where does it come from?
It's funny because I've just come from watching 2 days worth of coaching interviews, and over the course of those 2 days, I've seen enormous variation in both how people performed under simulated scenarios, how they performed whilst they were coaching, and how they performed at interview. I have no idea if people are born with a capacity for instruction, none at all. But if, regardless of what you're born with, I would say that the ideas that somebody surrounds themselves with early in their practice, I think, is really important. I also think that it's, as we said earlier, really, really difficult to get high quality feedback. And as a result, I think that often, and I say this all the time, people often get to becoming good coaches or good instructors by accident and not by design.
Yeah.
And based on what I see very often, particularly in elite sports, you often just end up with survival effects, where if it's a small sport, well, you might be the only person who is in any way capable of it. And if it's a big sport, you have gotten there not by design, but often by accident, because coach education is... Yeah, and it's very often, coach education is set up to make sure that everybody is of a standard, but that standard is often good enough to do the job, not be really good at the job. And there is a big difference between being very good at coaching or instructing and being good enough.
That's a good place to end. That's that you drop the mic on that bit. The standard is the important thing. Do we try and exceed it, or do we just live with it? Jamie, I really enjoyed that conversation. There's a lot of rabbit holes I think people can go down. There's a lot of information that will give people a lot of reading. They can go away and learn a lot more, getting into more detail based on what we've talked about. If people do want to reach out to you, if they want to follow you, learn more about what you do, all the different coaching activities that you're involved in, how do people follow you, reach you?
I'd say LinkedIn seems to be the best place to get me at the moment. I'm sure if you search my name, I'll pop up. Alternatively, share my email on here, which is jamie.taylor@dcu.ie, and I will do my best. I'm sorry if I'm a bit slow getting back to you. The
classic academic, just the 24-hour email reply turns into 3 weeks. I remember those days. Jamie, thank you very much. You've listened to this podcast before. You know what's coming. We like to wrap the episodes up by passing it back to you. It's a closing thought. It's something that you want to talk about that we haven't talked about. It's something that you want to just reiterate as being really important, or anything in between, really. So thank you very much for your time. Been a great chat. Really, as I said, was really looking forward to it, and you've not disappointed. So that was awesome. Jamie, over to you. How do you want to wrap it up?
Thank you. Well, I was thinking hard about what to say here, and I was walking the dog this afternoon. I thought I'd end on a bit of a spiritual note, and that's the real privilege and the value of helping other people get something better at something that they really want to be good at. And I genuinely don't think there is a better feeling than seeing somebody be able to improve their performance off the back of something that you have given them. And I think it's really easy to lose sight of all of that in reflection, in meeting standards, in changing practice, when really the nuts and bolts of this are we have the capacity to change lives as a result of what we do. And I think it's really easy to lose sight of that.
That's a great way to end. I think the meaning in coaching is huge. Yeah, I love that. Jamie, again, thank you. Great chat. Have a great day.
Thanks ever so much.
That was Dr. Jamie Taylor. Throughout this conversation, we talked about expertise, coaching, feedback, reflection, and performance. But underneath it all sits something very simple. It's the privilege of helping other people get better. If you're a coach, a leader, an instructor, a parent, a mentor, or a teammate, the work that we do has the potential to change the trajectory of somebody else's life. It's easy to get caught up in standards, assessments, and performance metrics and results. But perhaps the most important question is, who are you helping to improve? And how can you do that a little better tomorrow than you did today? If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast and share it with somebody who'd find it useful. Those recommendations really help us a lot. As always, thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Optimizing Human Performance podcast.